For over 35 years, Todd Garner has overseen blockbuster films like Con Air, Anger Management, Triple X, 13 Going on 30, and the Mortal Kombat franchise.
Why are they letting you make these movies?
Join Todd as he shares tips and stories from the front lines of producing in Hollywood.
I'm Adam Sandler.
I'm Rebel Wilson.
This is Jeff Probst.
I'm Kaylee Cuoco.
I'm Eli Roth.
This is Marlon Wayans.
Hey, it's Ed Helms.
This is Shay Mitchell.
Hey everybody, this is Kevin James, and this is The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide with Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
What a combination.
Welcome to The Producer's Guide, the show where top filmmakers pull back the curtain on how movies and TV get made. I'm Todd Garner. Today's guest is producer Todd Lieberman, founder of Hidden Pictures, an Oscar and Emmy-winning storyteller whose films have topped box office, earned 11 Academy Award nominations and 3 wins, and delivered breakout cultural moments. In his incredible body of work, Todd has produced Disney's record-breaking live-action Beauty and the Beast to Emmy-winning Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, global streaming smash Shotgun Wedding, and the sensational The Housemaid, which is on its way to grossing over $400 million worldwide. Todd's behind the 4-part documentary Soul Power on Amazon, and he's currently producing War Machine, Amazon's live-action Voltron, and Thornton, all projects that prove his knack for marrying entertainment and commerciality. On today's episode, we'll dig into how Todd finds projects, builds bold creative teams, navigates studio and streamer relationships, and turns big ideas into audience-defining films and TV series. Enjoy. All right, I'm here with Todd Lieberman. Hello, bud. How you doing?
Good morning.
Good morning. Are you in Los Angeles or are you in Australia shooting your movie Thornton with Alan Ritchson?
Our friend Alan Ritchson. I'm back in LA. I got back last week.
Nice.
So whatever time zone I'm on, I'm not quite sure. I'm in LA. Yeah.
Welcome back. Congratulations. Let me start by saying congratulations on The Housemaid. Insane.
Thanks,
heading towards over $400 million worldwide gross. The first $400 million worldwide grosser Lionsgate has had since John Wick 4. So congratulations. Is there a mashup planned? I think you should pitch it to Lionsgate, man. I think
Sydney Sweeney's vengeful character versus Keanu Reeves' vengeful character.
Dude, it writes itself. John Wick's going to clean house. It's just, come on. I got you, buddy. Well, congratulations on that. We'll talk about how that movie got made in a little bit here. I want to start off with young Todd Lieberman. You went to University of Pennsylvania, but before that, was there a moment that you realized this is what you wanted to do? How did you get into the idea of doing this for a living?
Great question, because as this is a producer's podcast, I don't know that there are many kids out there who, in the Midwest where I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, which desire to produce, because I don't think anyone really knew what that is. And frankly, a lot of people still don't know what that is. So I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I was in the theater my entire life. So I started doing plays when I was 7, acting, writing, directing, and theater was kind of everything I did. Musicals, plays, one-man shows, everything, and did it all through college as well. And so I knew that storytelling and kind of getting that reaction from an audience was something that I really craved. Now, the idea of Hollywood, I loved movies. That was kind of what I did on every weekend, as many kids did and, teens do. You kind of go to the movie theater and just see a movie or 2 or 3 in the weekend. And that was essentially what I did every weekend, that and play sports. And so the idea of like a career in movies was always something that I had dreamed of, but I didn't exactly know what that was. But storytelling was always the driver. So I moved out to LA after college.
What did you study in college?
So I studied psychology and classical studies, and I performed in a comedy theater troupe called the Mask and Wig Club, which is very similar to kind of Harvard's Hasty Pudding, where you would write, direct, produce, and kind of put the whole show on. So when I moved to LA, a friend and I, we wrote, directed, and produced 4 stage plays here in LA. And just the idea of kind of putting the show on was something that was always really fascinating to me. And getting that reaction from an audience just was a high that kind of never went away. And then frankly, the only thing I really knew was writing, acting, things like that. So yeah, for the first few months I was in LA, I was acting because that was kind of, I don't know, when you move to Hollywood, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm going to write or I'm going to act. I did that for a while, well, 4 months, got some real jobs, got my SAG card, did some crazy television series and movies and a couple plays, and realized real fast that was not my strength or desire. Just went and got kind of a regular assistant job after that. And that assistant job was working at a publicity firm, which did the foreign publicity for CBS soap operas. Okay. And while I was there, the president of the company, the guy who ran the company, was putting on something called the Catholics in the Media Awards at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. And he enlisted me to help. And we got Martin Sheen and Carol O'Connor and Gregory Peck and Laura Schlesinger and all these, like Cardinal Mahoney. Now I'm Jewish, putting on this event with LA's top Catholics. And after that event, and it went off very successfully, he pulled me aside. He said, "You're really good at this. Like, is this really what you want to do?" And it turned out publicity was not necessarily what I wanted to do, nor was putting on Catholic award shows. But I transferred that and went into a company called Summit. Now, Summit was doing foreign sales for independent films. This is well before they had merged and sold to Lionsgate, and run at the time by someone who I still consider one of the great people in the business, Patrick Wachsberger, and a guy named Bob Hayward. And that's where I really started to understand the film business.
It's amazing that you and I have a very, very similar path besides sharing the first name.
Yeah.
I grew up in San Fernando, which is also very far from the movie business. Didn't know anyone in the movie business. I also started off in theater. I started off as thinking I was going to be either a stand-up or perhaps like a theater director, writer. I wrote a bunch of plays, sketch plays and stuff like that in high school, and then went to a college that didn't even have a film program. I went to Occidental College. I technically have a degree in art.
Oh.
and economics from Occidental College. So and started not knowing what I want to do. I went the editing route, and you kind of went through the publicity route. I also love that someone said, "You're really good at this. Are you sure this is what you want to do?" Which is a pretty funny comment. I want to go back though really quickly to Cleveland, Ohio, watching all those movies over and over again. Is there a specific movie you can remember, or a specific time that you saw a movie that you went, "Ooh, this is," even if it was just when you got into plays and stuff, was there a movie that inspired you to say, "Ooh, this is a feeling I like and I want to try to give this to other people"?
There are two very specific ones, and I vividly remember them.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, the poster is hanging in my wall in my office. I'm now in my home office. And that was in 1979. My parents took me to a movie called The Champ with John Voight, Ricky Schroeder, a boxing film. I think it was actually recently named the saddest movie of all time.
Yes. All I just remember from that movie is Ricky Schroeder crying, "Come on, champ. Come on, champ."
Come on, champ, like dad punching on the wall. And like, I'm 6 years old and I'm leaving that theater crying.
Right.
And I don't understand why. I acknowledge that there's a very emotional feeling I'm going through, but I didn't understand what it was, why it was. But that feeling was so palpable that going into an experience and sitting in a room for 2 hours and coming out moved was, I would say life-changing, truly life-changing, partly because of the feeling, but also, and here's where it gets like crazy, partly because subconsciously and then later consciously, I knew that one day I needed to produce a boxing film that gave me the same feeling that I got when I saw that movie. And that there's a direct line from The Champ to The Fighter, which I produced in 2010.
And what was the second movie?
The second movie was The Goonies in 1985. I went to go see that movie, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this group of kids who are in and around my age. And I was like, what are they doing? Like, how are those kids who are like me doing that up there? And how do I do that? And so there's a direct line from the Goonies and the feeling I got from that movie and kind of that experience, that awe, that, oh my gosh, to where I am right now.
I mean, on the couple hundred episodes I've done of this podcast, it's always the same. There's always some movie that generally inappropriate for someone's age in terms of emotionally what they can handle. For a lot of people was The Exorcist.
Yeah.
And for some people it was like Jaws. Things that just, and anything that moved you outside of your body, of feelings that you weren't used to having as a kid, and you realize, oh, those feelings are directly attributed to this thing that I just witnessed. I have to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, it's powerful. I mean, there's a reason why we're all in it. I mean, there is that feeling that you get when you're a kid, and it lasts with you forever.
My parallel to your champ to the fighter is I grew up watching comedies constantly and realized I just have to do that. And so, like, a lot of times I'll be sitting in a theater because previews are my favorite part of the process, because you don't totally know if it's working or not, which is fun. That's kind of the most fun part, is kind of walking on the tightrope without a net. And when you hear that a whole theater erupted in laughter, and you can remember going back to when you were a kid and experiencing that feeling of everyone laughing at the same time is
Incredible.
magical.
Nothing like it.
Yeah, and it's why we do what we do. You eventually, from Summit, you rise through the ranks there. You bought a lot of really, really good movies there, including Memento, and propelled yourself along that way. Then you and I have another parallel track, which is both of us worked for David Hoberman. I worked for David Hoberman when he was the president of production of Disney and Touchstone and Hollywood Pictures. I was in the Touchstone division, and you, after he had left that, worked with him at Mandeville Films. How did that come about? And walk me through kind of some of the movies you produced there and the stories behind those.
So you actually have a dual role in this, and you don't even know about one of them.
Okay, good to find out here.
As we were thinking about this, it like a jolting memory popped into my head. So there's two things that are kind of parallels. I'll start with the one that you do know. So David hired me in 1999. I was at Summit at the time. As you mentioned, I brought in with another great producer named Aaron Ryder, Memento. Chris Nolan was our coverage reader. He was analyzing scripts for us at Summit and Newmarket for $50 a pop, and he had given us the script. Therefore, it was one of the greatest scripts of all time, and Newmarket ended up making it with Summit. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Arbor Los Ojos, American Pie, right? So those are the movies that I was involved in there. After the American Pie deal, there were several producers who were calling me saying, hey, rather than being the picket guy of like, this looks good, let's sell it to some foreign territories, do you want to make them from the ground up? That's what producing is. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, that's kind of like what I did in theater. Just start from the beginning, take it all the way through, and get an audience there. I ended up going to work for David. Okay. The first script that I ended up essentially getting bought by the studio was a script called jailbabe.com, written by a writer named Jason Velarde. We ended up selling it to you guys. You were running production at the time. Jason Reed was the executive and Kristen Burr was the junior executive. I think we sold it for scale. Okay. And we were like beyond excited. It was 1999. It was 2000, a script sale to a studio, massive. And our first meeting we had with you, and Jason and David and I go into this meeting, and you said, hey, great concept. I just had a meeting with Queen Latifah, or I just saw her at an award show, and I pitched her this concept.
Yeah. Wait, let me just interject 1 second. Yeah. I saw her at the Academy Awards.
That's what it was. It was like the Governor's Ball or the Academy Awards.
Exactly. I'll tell you the story. Go ahead. You finish your story.
And
Sorry to interrupt.
And so the script that we sold wasn't anywhere near what you pitched us in that room. It was a whole different thing. And you're like, I just pitched it to Queen Latifah, and here's the concept. We're like, well, that is very different than what we just sold. And I remember coming out of that meeting, and Jason was like, what just happened? I'm like, I don't know. This is for my first time going through it. But guess what? We got that movie made. All right, so that's one.
Bringing down the house. Bringing down
The house. Now, that was my first movie that I, had some version of producing come out, became a giant success.
So what happened was, just to interject real quick, what happened was I was at the Academy Awards and I was at the governor's ball, and Latifah had just won for Chicago, or definitely was nominated. We're there. I was with my ex-wife, and I walked up to Latifah, and my ex-wife was excited to meet her. And I said, "Oh, nice to meet you." Da, da, da. And I said, "I have got the movie for you. It's called jailbabe.com." And she's like, "What the fuck?" And I started to pitch her, and I realized I was kind of losing her. So I sort of modified the pitch, and she goes, "That sounds really good." And I go, "Yeah, we're going to," and you know what? I've done a couple movies with Steve Martin. We're going to get someone like Steve Martin. She goes, you get Steve Martin, I'm in. I'm like, all right, I just put a movie together at the Academy Awards.
And you did.
And I turned and walked away, and my ex-wife, which is probably why she's my ex-wife now, said, "That was the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen in my life. How can you pitch an Academy Award winner this dumb comedy?" And I said, "Hey, man, I'm making movies."
Now take that ambition and guts that you had. Take that personality. Now rewind, okay, 2 years earlier. I'm sitting at a dinner at what was that? Dominic's, that place that was next to Guys. Where
Dominic's.
Okay. I'm sitting at a dinner at Dominic's with a girl that I was hanging out with as a friend and two of her friends. So the four of us. One of those friends was Sandra Bullock. Okay, so Sandra Bullock, two other ladies, and I sitting at a dinner. You came up to the table and you said, "Hi, I'm Todd Garner. I'm an EVP at Disney. Sandra, it's really nice to meet you." And you started doing this whole pitch in front, like you didn't know her, okay? And I'm sitting there, and I'm working at Summit at the time, and I'm like, wow, that guy has serious guts and ambition. Okay. Now, at that dinner, Sandra Bullock says, separate and apart from Todd Garner coming up to her at the table and introducing himself, she says, "I'm going to take some time off." 2 days later, I'm at Summit. I get a call from a producer who has a script that Sandra Bullock's attached to. And she says, "I want to send this to you guys." And I said, "Hey, just, by the way, naive as hell." I said, "Hey, just for what it's worth, I was randomly at a dinner with Sandra Bullock the other night, and she said she's going to take a year off. So that might, may or may not inform whatever you think you have as your attachment. Todd Garner's pitching her a bunch of things anyway." So she then proceeds to write a letter to my entire company and to Patrick Wachsberger, Bob Hayward, and CC's the whole company and tells them how I'm a liar and how I make up stories and how I said I had dinner with Sandra Bullock and I didn't, and he should be fired, right? So of course, Patrick takes this letter into my office and says, "This is ridiculous. What is this?" I saved that letter. I still have it. Years later, I get Sandra Bullock to star in The Proposal. That same producer called me and said, "I have a script to submit to you." And guess what I sent in response?
What?
The letter. There you go. So anyway, a long story of you coming up to people benefited me personally by putting a movie together and bringing it on the house. And I saw that behavior 2 years earlier with Sandra Bullock.
Well, Mark Varadian and Jason Reed, because the Touchstone logo was a lightning bolt going through a planet. And Mark Varadian and Jason Reed used to call that throwing the bolt. Because I would usually walk up, hand my business card, say, "Hey, hi, this is me. This is what I do. I'd like to get you in a movie."
It was amazing.
It's funny. Sandy and I we became really good friends, and the only movie we ever did with her was While You Were Sleeping. And so I still to this day really, really want to find something. So you beat me in that. I've sold a few things with her and love her dearly, but
she's great.
Have not had the pleasure of producing a movie that she's been attached to star. So you got me on that respect.
You met her around the same time I did, we'll say.
So you're with David, everything is going well, and you guys are starting to make movies. You have a deal at Disney. Was Bring Down the House the first movie you guys did together? And then walk me through kind of that run.
Yeah. Bringing Down the House came out. We made it for 35. It goes on and makes, I'm making up the number here, 140 something like that. It does quite well. And after that, we do Raising Helen with Kate Hudson. We do a couple other movies. I don't remember exactly what they were. And we start a string of films that we're doing kind of on a consistent clip with Disney. And then in and around Beverly Hills Chihuahua or something like that, both of us, David and I, and by this time I had kind of evolved from employee to partner. We made a conscious effort that we wanted to expand the horizon beyond, Disney kind of fare. And so that was a concerted effort to go out and find movies like The Fighter, or, we had done a movie called Traitor with Don Cheadle at the time. Later on, a movie called Warm Bodies. And, it was kind of like, in my mind, it was the theater approach to making films of like in the theater, you could do a big, giant musical, you could do a small, intimate drama, you could do a sketch comedy, you could do a one-man thing, right? And that's kind of what my vision was of producing. And in David's mind, he'd come from, obviously born and bred in the studio system, running a studio. And as running a studio, as you know better than anybody, you need kind of an array of films. You need a slate touching all genres. And so both of those philosophies gelled together. And then we ended up, we were doing like a movie or two a year for many, many years. We were together for 23 years. And then Beauty and the Beast was, I'll call it a gift, right? It was kind of a, we didn't create Beauty and the Beast. Beauty and the Beast was an incredible classic, one of the greatest animated films, if not greatest films of all time. And we were given the opportunity to remake that with modern technology. So I'm thrilled and kind of honored that we got that opportunity. And, I think that's probably testament to David's relationship there for so many years and kind of the success that the both of us had together there.
Well, for sure. I mean, that movie really needed a steady hand to produce it because it was a monster and it was a very big undertaking. And one of the first ones that they were doing, allowing to be pulled from the vault and redone. Because before Iger had taken over, there was no way Eisner would ever let us do that. He was too worried about IP fatigue and stuff like that. So we never had the opportunity. So needless to say, I was very jealous, but you guys did an incredible job on that.
Also, the technology hadn't caught up yet. I think had they been unvaulted earlier, potentially the technology wouldn't have been evolved enough to make it look the way it was supposed to look. And so I think the time kind of meshed with the need.
Absolutely. And I can remember being at Disney, seeing Beauty and the Beast for the first time and watching the movie, and it's in 2D animation, it's gorgeous. And then all of a sudden you go into that ballroom scene that they were experimenting with CG at the time because Pixar was making a run, and just being completely blown away and being like, well, do the whole movie like that. It was incredible. And seeing that. And so when you guys were able to bring it to life, it was obviously made over $1 billion. But it must have been really daunting because as somebody who knows what it's like to bring franchises to life and the fandom, and sadly, Disney witnessed it on the negative side on Snow White. What was your North Star? What was like the daily occurrence of casting that movie and when you were shooting it? Because that's a big weight to have on your shoulders. There's a huge, obviously, massive fandom of that movie. Walk me through kind of the decision-making process and kind of where you guys came down on a day-to-day basis in taking that on.
Well, I would say I would kind of broaden it out and make it more of a philosophy, less specific to Beauty and the Beast and more kind of philosophical to all IP that has a fan base. And I would attribute that to the Muppets, which we did 2 Muppets films. I would even attribute that to books like Wonder. To me, if one goes in with the fear that you're going to upset a fan base, I think that potentially could have negative consequences. If you go in with understanding the soul of what it is, what is it that moved you about it? What is it that moves audiences about it? I think it has to start there. So when I think about the Muppets, I think about when I was a kid. I think about how I felt when I was a kid. I think about the zaniness. And then within that, what are the rules that kind of the guardrails of if you go too far over here, you go too far over here, you're off the track. But as long as you've got the soul going on, if you start from here and say it starts with love, it starts with a soul, then I think that's probably the right track. And we did the same thing with Beauty and the Beast. And now, thankfully, we had Alan Menken, who is award-winning, great, one of the great music people in the history of cinema. And so we were able to get a couple new songs. We updated it a little bit. We knew what the hits were, and we knew where we could potentially expand a little bit. Casting, we had a lot of interest in that. Emma, giant, massive star, kind of identified everything that Belle was and is. In her personal life, stood for everything that Belle was and is. And then on the B side, Dan Stevens was incredible. We actually started in that movie. We started with a practical Beast costume, which was comical to say the least. When we tested it, it looked like one of those old Godzilla movies or something. Godzilla guy coming through. And we realized pretty quickly that would have to be CG. But in a world where you have to get the right screenwriter, which was Stephen Chbosky, you have to find the right director, which was Bill Conn, and everybody in that process was in love with the source material. There wasn't one person in that whole process who was doing it for a reason other than there's a time and a place now to remake this for a new generation, and we all love the original. Right. Bill was the steward of that look, that feel, and obviously an incredibly accomplished filmmaker.
Did you have a hard time convincing people, like directors especially, to come on board? Because I can remember a time, I'm old enough to remember a time where they couldn't get directors to direct Marvel movies because it's like comic book nerd stuff. And so when you're remaking something like Beauty and the Beast, what was the process like finding a filmmaker who's willing to take on that challenge, given that the movie was, it's not like you could have, you guys did, but it's not like on the face of it, it needed improvement. So how did that work, finding that filmmaker?
That's a really good question. And if I go back in my brain, however many years ago that was, honestly, the real answer is that we didn't spend a whole lot of time looking. That Bill came in pretty early on after we had the script with a vision. I remember sitting at the time in Sean Bailey's office talking about it with Bill. And we were kind of off to the races. It wasn't like a huge search where we're struggling to find someone. Bill expressed early interest. We expressed early interest in him. He came in, presented a vision, and we all loved it.
So when you're writing the script, how is the decision made in terms of how much we're going to deviate from the original, right? Because you can just do a shot-for-shot remake of that movie and probably have been just fine. Walk me through the sort of the creative process of like, all right, here's the movie. This works great. It's not like you can do more with live action because you can do anything with animation. How did those decisions get made of how much to deviate from the original? Because you want to give the audience something new, not just a retread of the animated movie done live action. That's not enough. So tell me, how did you guys come to those decisions?
Yeah, Stephen Chbosky. So the project started this way. It started with me calling Disney saying, what if, rather than doing a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, we do a darker, go to the original source material and tell the story of the Beast from his point of view. That's how the whole thing started. This was years before, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we developed that script where it was kind of a grittier, darker Beast movie, origin of the Beast, basically. Then Cinderella came out, and then they called us and said, hey, I think we were in the middle of making one of the Muppets films, and I was in London at the time, and we got the call saying, hey, we think this Beast movie is great, but would you guys consider taking the original and doing that and updating it? So that was essentially them giving us a gift because of an early call based on that we were kind of already doing something in that world. So it didn't take us long to say, okay, great. Let's do a technological challenge there, because how cool to learn those technologies. And then when we started developing the script with Stephen Chbosky, who's incredible, it became a very organic process of, okay, how do we make Belle for a modern day audience? Let's lean into a little bit more of what her already essentials were in her DNA and kind of expand those a little bit. Let's give her a little bit more fortitude. Let's create a little bit more characterizations for other characters. Let's find a few other songs to put in. So it became very natural, frankly. It wasn't, we weren't walking on eggshells. My recollection is that we weren't walking on eggshells of, gosh, I hope we don't piss anyone off. And this feels like an opportunity to expand rather than, a struggle on how to.
You've done it multiple times too, because you also did it with Wonder. I mean, you've done it multiple times with books. And so in taking that on, did you learn from that process in adapting all those IP that came later? Is it the same process for you?
Here's the truth, and this is going to sound ridiculous. I'm not sure how you go into like a test screening process that you mentioned is your favorite part of the process, or when you see a first cut of something. So the way I do it is I'll call it a meditative state. I don't know that it's actually a meditative state, but I disconnect myself from my involvement in the piece. And I'm able to do that. And I do the same thing when we're developing something like Wonder or anything that has a fan base. I know we're making something for an audience. Obviously, intellectually, I understand that, but I have to feel it too. And I am a fan. I'm an audience member myself. And I've said it a gazillion times, which is, I don't feel like I'm all that special or refined. And that's to the advantage of making stories, right? Because if I'm making something for me, I'm also making it for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of my philosophy. So when I first read Wonder, it had not quite yet been published. David and I read it the same night. I was just floored. I was like crying. I was like uncontrollably emotional from reading that book. And David and I talked that night, and the conversation went something like this. I have no idea how we get this movie made, but we're getting it made.
Mm-hmm.
However it happens, it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And it became, an 8-year process. And what ended up happening with the development of that, different than the development of Beauty and the Beast, when Beauty and the Beast was determined to be a remake of the animation, that development process was essentially smooth. Wonder, we had a ton of people coming in, pitching, saying, all right, you can't show his face at all. So the whole movie is going to be behind his head, or you can't use this character, or no one wants to see that. And our job as producers was, no, we're staying on the track of what made us feel the thing that we felt when we read the book.
Right.
And we kept at it. Right. And so I know eventually we'll get to the discussion of what a producer does and why a producer is essential. But if you are the guiding light, you're taking into consideration audience. But for me, I'm taking into consideration heart and soul. Like, what do I think is that move? If we do that move, is that going to alter the feeling that I had when I first read the book? Is that going to alter the feeling that I had when I first read the script?
Right. Well, because you're obviously, when you're reading that book, you're imagining what his face looks like. You're putting yourself into this emotionally, and so by being able to hang on to that is very, very important, because yes, you can go off track early and then never be able to recover. So you from working at Mandeville with Hoberman, you move on and start your own company called Hidden Pictures. first of all, why is it called Hidden Pictures? And second of all, what was the impetus for you deciding to strike out on your own, and kind of what is your thesis for Hidden Pictures and the movies that you decide to make?
Great. So, as I said, David and I were together 23 years, awesome relationship. I consider him, certainly an early mentor, and we had a ton of really amazing success and failure together. That's what makes a great partnership. During COVID, as everybody had some version of an epiphany, my epiphany was, gosh, the business is changing a lot. Gosh, streaming is changing the alchemy of what things are. Gosh, people are more scared than they used to be. And I had these, all these synapse firings in my brain of what it looks like to tell stories in the future. And I sat down with David. I'm like, I just have all these ideas, and I got to do something different. And in a year from now, I'm going to do something different. And I don't know what that thing is, but I'm just telling you that I'm going through this crazy evolution in my head, and I don't know what it is yet, but I know it's something. And this was amazing, and I'm ready for my next chapter. Okay. So in that year, I kind of figured out what I wanted to do, what that meant, how to explore those things. And what it ended up being was essentially a version of kind of what we were doing before, but a little bit more with an entrepreneurial bent. Okay. So here's another true story that my wife certainly doesn't believe, but I'll tell it for the sake of storytelling anyways. And I was sitting in my home office here, and I was thinking about, what I love about movies, and, how my brain is designed for endings, which is why everlasting television has always been harder for me, because I am designed for that culmination, that feeling of catharsis at the end, where you pushed off into something at the end of a film. And all of a sudden, the term Hidden Pictures popped into my mind, with the idea that every story that we tell, there's something underneath it, that you're kind of excavating something and coming to a realization at the end of that story, whether that be for character or time or place. And that all of the things that I had worked on in my career with David, before, in theater, they all had some version of discovery. I was like, gosh, Hidden Pictures. And so then I pitched that to my wife, Heather. I'm like, I think I came up with a name for a company. It just hit me in the head, Hidden Pictures. And she said, that's great. Is that because we live in Hidden Hills? I said,
well, because your original company, Mandeville, is because he lived on Mandeville, a canyon. So it's not a tough leap.
It literally had nothing to do with that. But I'm like, yeah, I guess we do.
Was your other idea Thousand Oaks Productions?
I'm like, Heather, that's really funny because it didn't even cross my mind, but what a great coincidence.
That's great. That's amazing.
So the idea was, how do we take all kinds of versions of storytelling, right? So we had done the studio thing for many years, and you've done it successfully on all sides of it. And you remember those early days of Disney where any one of us would have an idea, and one of your executives would be like, that's a great idea. Go find a writer, $350,000, right? And it was kind of like that. And it is not like that anymore.
No.
And so the philosophy was, how do we build stories that are kind of distribution agnostic, and then find the right place for them, wherever that might be, whatever those stories might be, fitting under this idea of discovery. So, we hit the ground running. The first thing that we sold, the very first thing we sold, was the book for The Housemaid, which had been published as an independent publisher. Frida McFadden was writing medical thrillers. She's a doctor, and she was wrapped by a small agency in the UK. And one of my executives, Carly Kleinbart Elter, had read the book, and she and the president of our company, Alexander Young, called me when I was on a retreat. They had both read the book, and they called me and they said, you have to read this book. it was like, I don't know, like we had just started the company. And I said, you guys love it. Let's just go option it with our own money. I'll pay for it. And like, well, we'd really like you to read it. I was like, okay, in the meantime, go make an offer and I'll just back it. I trust your guys' taste. Anyways, I took 4 hours out of that day of the retreat. I read the book and I just loved it. And similar to the feeling, obviously very different genre, but reading Wonder, or the feeling of seeing the original pitch for The Fighter, or reading the first draft of The Proposal, like the feeling of that, I was like, we have to make this. And I just fell for the twists. I love the genre. It's something I had never done before. And that was the very first thing we sold. And we kind of like, as opportunities presented themselves, and as the philosophy of how does one build a story and then figure out the best distribution mechanism for it, that really came into focus. So, Voltron, another movie that we're in post on with our mutual friend Ross and Thurber, that was a rights IP that was free and clear. And, Rawson and I went and partnered with the rights holder, Bob Koppler, a gentleman out of St. Louis. I called all the studios. I would say there was like lukewarm response to developing it. And Rawson and I said, what if, rather than setting this up as development, we built it? And we financed him to go out and film a day. He filmed a day, 4 minutes of the movie. We finished it with visual effects. He pulled in a ton of favors from ILM, color timed, scored, mixed, hired a composer. We hired graphic designers. And so about 8 months later, we had this incredible presentation of Voltron, inclusive of 4 minutes of the movie.
Wow.
So I called all those studios back and I was like, we have a pitch and you cannot hear this pitch on Zoom. It's in person. And I'm not going to tell you why, but we're going to do it in your screening room. We pitched 11 places and we got 9 offers.
That's amazing.
So going from tepid interest to 9 offers, which with like almost green light language. And now we're in post on the film. We just tested it over the weekend. And we did the same theory with, so that's on like the large budget side of things. And then we did the same thing on this docuseries that we did on the ABA
There you go.
with Dr. J. And I know you did a documentary with Diane Warren recently. This was same exact thing. Like we had coach, Hall of Fame basketball coach George Karl, who coached the Cleveland Cavaliers when I was a kid growing up in Cleveland, DM'd me on Twitter years ago and said, we should talk because I like the stories you're telling. And
Nice.
me doing the ABA. And I said, I'm not a documentarian. Let me introduce you to some people that do it. Anyways, he said, I don't want to do it with anyone else. Let's figure it out together. Same exact thing happened. Called all the different networks. They basically laughed me off the phone. And I said, all right, let's just go make it. So put our own money in and we just started filming. We filmed Dr. J, we filmed George Karl, we filmed Bob Costas, and we put together kind of a presentation. And then later, 8 months later, we took it out. Same exact thing happened. Licensed it to Amazon, four episode series, picked up immediately, and it aired 2 weeks ago. So, and that's kind of the theory right there. How do we build something and then present it a little bit more fully formed to a buyer, whether that buyer be for streaming, for theatrical, for television, for whatever.
Let's go back to when you had the idea that is definitely not related to where you live for your company. Do you remember? Do you remember who the first call was that you made to tell them that you were going out on your own?
I don't actually, but what I do remember is this. When I made that decision, I took 10 meetings of people across various disciplines. Okay. So a couple studio heads, some bankers, some agents, some TV people, some people not in the business. And I just kind of talked about what I wanted. And I knew that I needed some time to incubate these thoughts and feelings. And I ended up hiring 2 people to do business plans for me, kind of do financial analyses. I had lined up I'd already lined up a bank to kind of raise a bunch of money. There was like a big money raise, a medium money raise, a small money raise. What I came to through those discussions, and I didn't like advertise it to many, many people, but what I came to from those discussions is that what was important to me was market flexibility. At the time, Joe Drake was running Lionsgate, and he and I had and still have a very close relationship. And between some conversations that I had with Joe and some conversations I had with a really close friend of mine, David Glickman, who created Mint Mobile, it became very clear to me that for this company to be successful in the vision that I wanted it to be, I didn't want to be beholden to investors. And so Joe and I came up with kind of a business plan that kind of satisfied both. I put some of my own money into the company, and David with Mint Mobile contributed some for a fund that we have to use for development and other things.
So let's jump ahead to the testing of Voltron this past weekend. I would have to assume the effects are not done. And this is obviously a very heavy effects driven movie. Walk me through the testing. Walk me through, obviously you did it over the weekend because you want families, I'm assuming. And where did you test, and kind of how fun was it, given that you definitely told the audience now all the effects are going to look amazing when they're done. And then of course, one of the first things you'll hear in the preview, the post mortem is, I thought the effects were really weird. So how comfortable are you, and when do you kind of decide when to test the movies?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's part of what we all have to go through now, and we've done it. You've done it a ton with your movies. We've done it a few times with some visual effects movies, or even movies like Chippendale Rescue Rangers, which was like part effects, part animation. We're doing it all the time. So, what I've come to, I think, at least convince myself or realize, is that if the story works, if the story is really working, and it's not dependent on the visuals, the scores will be representative within a range of how the movie's working. Thankfully, I can't get too much into what the testing process was for Voltron, but we did quite well. And yeah, the visual effects are early days. So you know that the movie's working really well, because once those visual effects are fully rendered, in my mind, you can expect to gain a couple points.
In the double digits, by the way. Not a couple, but okay. Yes.
In my mind.
Yes.
And yeah, when all the bells and whistles are put on it, and you've got the music pumping, and the mix is there, and the effects are there, and everything's working, then yeah, the scores will go up. I'm being conservative here. I'm going to give it 5 points. Like when all those things happen.
Sure.
So we found ourselves in a really good place regardless. And so in that regard, all right, we're humming. And I've been in those situations where, we're in real trouble, because even if the visuals were cranking, there's zero emotion. If you're feeling emotion from a storyboard or a weird, like, cutout picture of a lion going like this, which we have a bunch of, if you're feeling emotion from that, then yeah, you're in good shape.
Yeah, no visual effects can save you from a bad story or characters that no one cares about. That's for sure. So you mentioned before, yes, I do want to talk to you about producing and what producers do. We talk about that a lot in the process, but you've already in the last 45 minutes really talked about producing, what you do. When it comes to putting your money where your mouth is, not taking no for an answer, creating a sizzle, just going and shooting interviews, optioning material yourself. Look, not everybody can afford to do that. You're in rare air in that way. But when you really think about producing, and I know that you have some great employees and younger people that you mentor, and you're really great at that. If you want to encapsulate producing separate and apart from just definitely putting your own money into stuff and putting your money where your mouth is, which is always a great thing, which is just going back to your original thing of when you came here, of just go make it. That's how you grew up, was in these plays saying, hey, I just want to make this stuff. Tell me like when you think about producing and you're kind of telling your people that you're working with what a producer does, what does that mean to you?
Doing this for whatever it is, almost 30, whatever, 25, 30 years, you get that question a lot. And frankly, from family, like there's a 1,000 producers. Like, what does a producer do? And the definition that I've come up with, and I do believe this takes a lot of time and a lot of hours to figure it out, because it's not read a book, understand the job. It's an instinctual feeling of rhythms. And so I think of it this way. To me, a producer is someone who needs to know enough about all aspects of the process with the guiding light of what that end result is supposed to be able to step in when there's a deficiency, and there's always a deficiency on some level, whether that's in the writing, whether that's in production design, whether that's with the director needing help, whether that's with casting, to be able to step in and help guide that train. And equally important, to step back and do nothing when that train's on the track and humming. Okay. And so to me, it's a job. You need to understand the 360-degree view of where this is supposed to go, know which buttons to push and know which buttons not to push and when, right? So each project is bespoke, obviously. So I gave a few examples of how to get things made. We have a series on MGM Plus right now, Robin Hood, that we were just picked up for a second season. This was an old friend of mine, John Glenn, amazing writer, called me a couple years ago and said he had written a Robin Hood spec for television. And I said, yeah, I don't know that that's my jam, but I love your writing. Let me read it. And it was like Batman Begins for Robin Hood. I'm like, this is effing awesome. I was like, okay, we can go down the conventional route of let's send it to a network or a studio and develop, but let's try something different. If you would be up for this, would you write 4 episodes speculatively? Would you, with me and your partner in Serbia, could we collectively budget this and figure out what we could make it for and do 10 episodes of exactly what the series is? If you do that and we come up with our presentation, I believe we can get this series picked up. Now, did I know that for sure? No, but I knew the material was great. I knew there was a hook. I assumed there would be a buyer. So we did that. He did that. We took that package. I took it right to Kevin Beggs at Lionsgate. And I said, I want to treat this like you would an independent film. Sell off foreign territories, take domestic as the upside. And we ended up with their partnership getting a 10-episode immediate pickup. Now, does that happen if we go the conventional route? I don't know, maybe. Does that happen if the producer in me doesn't have the vision of here I think's the best way to leverage this particular opportunity? Maybe, maybe not. But that's what I think it is. I think it's understanding what that opportunity is, falling in love with it, and knowing the levers to push to get it to fruition. And once it's there and once it's going, if it's on the track, do nothing.
Was there a specific instance you can recall from your past that gave you the idea to do that? Where did that idea come from to do it that way?
To the series?
Yeah, to have them write 4, to budget it in Serbia. Where did the notion to do that kind of producing come from?
So when David and I were together, we had a deal at ABC TV, Touchstone Television, whatever it was over the years. And I was continually frustrated by television development because it always felt like kind of throw a bunch of stuff against the wall, see what sticks, maybe get a pilot every couple of years, you get a show picked up. But it was counterintuitive to me. And, in the same way that I feel like we'd put films together, I'd always kind of wanted to do that for television, build it and figure out the best way to execute and articulate the vision. A few years ago, a few years prior to that, we had filmed a movie in Serbia. And I took the director and the writer and one other person out to dinner in Belgrade. And they ordered platters of meat and cheese and drinks and wine. And the whole bill for 4 of us was $60. And I was like, oh my God, this place is ridiculously inexpensive. Now, it turns out that John Glenn and John English, the partner on the directing partner on Robin Hood, had also done a project in Serbia in Belgrade. So they knew exactly what the process would be, and they had contacts there that would be able to execute that vision. So it was part instinct and part a little bit built by some prior frustrations of the TV development process.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, that's what producing is taking and compounding all those failures and wins and using them to your advantage on the next project, which is why good producers are so important, because you can see the forest through the trees in that way, and being able to guide these projects to get them made in ways that are unconventional is why you're so successful. Let's talk about Housemaid for a second. That was in development for a long time. These things always seem like overnight successes. Obviously, it was meant to be made in the exact way it was made. So what's incredibly interesting about this movie is it goes along for a certain amount of time and you think it's one kind of movie, and then the rug is completely pulled and it's not that kind of movie. Paul Feig is a bold choice, because Paul Feig is known for kind of that first half, 3/4 of the movie, not the back half necessarily. So walk me through the casting of Paul and Amanda and Sydney in that process.
It's kind of fascinating because this is it. You said it, most 99% of the time, 90% of the time, the movie that's made is the movie that was supposed to be made.
Yeah.
Right. And we've been through this a bunch. Casting falls out, new people come in, and then you make the movie. You're like, I couldn't imagine it any other way but that. So, as I mentioned before, we'd gotten the book. We hired an amazing screenwriter, Rebecca Sonnenschein. She wrote a draft that was incredible. It actually wasn't in development that long, all things considered. She wrote a first draft that felt like a movie. We did a quick pass with her. Awesome draft. We ended up putting a director on, not Paul. And we went down the path a little bit with that director. We ended up getting Sydney Sweeney, to star. That was our first choice. At the same time, the book was cresting in sales. So we knew that we had something. We had a live one. And that director ended up getting pulled off of our movie to go make a movie that they had written for Netflix. And so we were directorless about, I want to say, 16 weeks maybe out from production, because Sydney Sweeney had a very specific window she needed to hit because she was going into Euphoria season 3. So with 16 weeks, we went out and we're like, all right, who can we plug into this that would execute the vision of this film? Now, Paul had been wanting to do a conventional thriller. We took a bunch of meetings. Lionsgate had just made a Simple Favor 2 with him, and he really wanted to do it. I remember having a conversation with Adam Fogelson, and I'm like, Bridesmaids is potentially one of my top 5 favorite movies of all time. Mm-hmm. I think it's incredible. He is an amazingly talented filmmaker. But I asked the same question you asked. I said, this is not necessarily that, but if we're all comfortable with him putting his imprint on it, I'm good to play. I just don't know exactly what that is, but you have to trust his talent because he is incredibly talented. So the movie that we ended up with is a little bit different than the movie we developed, which was a little bit more of a conventional thriller. Paul put his turn on it. Those kind of humorous pieces, that like maximalism, that comes from Paul, and where the producer-director relationship really comes into play there, and he has a wonderful producing partner named Laura Fisher, is when you can push and pull against instincts, right? So if Paul's maximalism is being pulled back by my groundedness, and somewhere we come in the middle where it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, that to me is the beautiful alchemy of when a producer and a director are working really well together.
And you may not know the answer to this question, and I hope you do. Do you have any idea what their high side comps were for this movie to get it greenlit?
It was not $400 million.
I know it's not $400 million worldwide. Do you have any idea what they were comping for your green light or what the high side was?
I mean, I do know that there was going to be an extraordinary amount of joy if we hit 75 domestic.
Wow. Well,
Yeah.
you have an extraordinary amount of joy then, don't you?
So yeah, that they were going to be celebrating in the streets if we had hit
Right.
75 domestic. We're at 127 domestic.
And how do you explain the Sydney Sweeney roller coaster that she's been on box office wise? What do you attribute to? She's obviously a massive star. So what do you attribute to? And did you have like a stomach ache for like the weeks leading up? Like, oh God, oh no, you know, because she's obviously a massive movie star. But
Yeah.
what is your explanation of, you know, the highs and lows and this such incredible high now with her in this movie?
I don't have an explanation for it. I can say this, you know, every once in a while, you get to work on a movie where you feel like it was a special experience. I've had a few of them. The Proposal was a special experience. I just loved being with Sandy and Ryan and Ann Fletcher and Pete Corelli. It was incredible. That's how The Housemaid was. Sydney is amazing. She is a wonderful human. She is incredibly hardworking. Amanda is the coolest. Brandon was incredible. We just had a great time together. So, you know, I think a lot of the stuff that was going on in the press vis-a-vis Sydney, I tried to ignore it. I think a lot of it is clickbait. I think a lot of it was unfair. Having seen our movie play with test audiences and going back to one of your earlier points, sitting in a theater for our very first test screening and that movie playing like a rock concert, it almost didn't matter what was going on in anyone's personal life or what the press was saying. It didn't matter because the movie stood on its own. And I knew that once people started seeing that movie, it was going to become an experience. I didn't think it was going to become this much of an experience, but I knew it would become an experience. And we had the movie. We always had the movie.
Well, that's all that matters. And thank you. I want to be respectful of your time. You're amazing. I could talk to you all day. So I always like to end with this question, Todd. Best memory on set?
Gosh. Well, I'm looking at in the reflection. I'm looking at a picture over there and I'm I'm remembering something pretty funny. So back there, I don't know that this is the best, but it's a funny anecdote story. We're making the Muppets. Back there, you can see a picture of me holding a Muppet. James Bobin, the director, who's awesome, great friend, directed, you know, the first and the second. This is from the first one. And he said, why don't you be a Muppet in our finale scene? Wow. And I'm like, me? A Muppet? And so I got my own Muppet and kind of, it's very hard. You have to squeeze into like a little box and there's a monitor in front of you and everything you do is the opposite of what's going on the monitor. You have to almost be a contortionist and you're like squeezed in with like 100 people there. The big finale scene's happening and Kermit is giving his rousing speech and all of us are there and we're doing the Muppets. And I was like, I'm a Muppet in the finale of our movie. Now cut to the first cut of the film, we're all watching it. And the big finale comes on and James Bobin says, what's that? And there's all these, and then one of them's like to the side, looking the wrong way, like bent over weird. And I'm like, that's me. We literally had to digitally remove me.
Oh my gosh. I love that. I love that story. So much. It's those moments that just you make yourself pinch yourself. I have one moment in my career that is almost identical. Michael Bay, during the shooting of Pearl Harbor, I was the president of production and it was my idea to do the movie. And so he was very, very, very funny about it. He was, I'm getting you in this movie. I don't want to do a cameo, bro. He's like, I'm getting you in this movie. So he puts me in this whole Admiral's outfit. It looked awesome, by the way. It was like a white thing. And the general was coming on board. It's like this huge scene. We're all lined up and, and we're also salute him. And the military advisor, who was the history advisor, did not know who I was and kept screaming at me. You're not doing it right. Elbow up. More Chris. And I'm panicking. I don't want to be there. And I'm panicking. And I just look out of the corner of my eye. Michael Bay is behind the monitor, dying laughing because this guy is just in my face like a drill sergeant. Who is this guy? Can we get rid of him? He's the worst. And I'm like, I would totally agree. Get rid of me. I don't want to be here. But you can see me in the movie. I'm in the lineup on the battleship where they come on and we all salute the
That's amazing.
general.
Look, that is the beauty of, you were an actor, I was an actor. There's a reason we're not doing that now.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Well, Todd, love you, man. Thank you so much. Congratulations on everything, especially on the massive worldwide success of Housemaid, and good luck in all your future endeavors.
Thank you, brother. Good to talk.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Producer's Guide. If you're a fan of this podcast, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. And if you got any questions about producing, send me a DM on X at Todd_Garner. I want to thank my producer, Steve Delamater. And until next week, I'm Todd Garner. See you then.